Easter Island, the mystery of the giant stone heads. Hello and welcome. Today we have a special story for you from a small island in the middle of the big blue ocean. It is a story about huge stone heads and the people who made them. Before we begin, I have a question for you. What is the biggest thing you have ever seen with your own eyes? It could be a big building, a tall mountain, or a huge animal. Please write your answer in the comments below. I would love to read what you have seen. Now let us begin our story. On a small island in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean lived a boy named Manu. The island was called Rapa Nui, but many people today call it Easter Island. This island was his whole world. It had green hills, dark caves, and a coast with black rocks. The ocean was all around, a great blue blanket that touched the sky. Manu's people were strong. They were good sailors and good farmers. They grew sweet potatoes and bananas. They fished in the ocean. But the most important work on the island was different. It was the work of stone. All over the island there were giant stone heads. They were called Moai. These Moai were huge. They were taller than the tallest man and heavier than many big trees together. They had long faces, big noses, and strong chins. They stood on stone platforms and looked not at the ocean, but at the villages of the people. They were like silent watchers, the old fathers of the island. Every day, Manu saw the Moai. When he woke up, he saw them watching his village. When he played near their stone bases. When he went to sleep, he knew they were out there in the dark. They were a part of his life, like the sun and the sea. Manu's father, Rico, was a stone carver. He was one of the men who made the Moai. His hands were strong and hard. Every morning, he would walk with the other men to a special place on the island. It was a mountain, a volcano that was sleeping. The rock of this mountain was special. It was the stone used to make the Moai. Manu wanted to be like his father. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to carve the stone. But he was young. His job was to help his mother, to gather food, and to learn the stories of his people. One day Manu asked his father, "Can I come with you to the mountain? I want to see you work. I want to see how a Moai is born from the rock." Rico looked at his son. Manu was small, but his eyes were bright with questions. "The mountain is a place for workers, not for boys," Rico said. His voice was not angry, but it was firm. "The work is hard and dangerous. You will stay here and help your mother." Manu was sad, but he said, "Yes, father." But the picture of the mountain stayed in his mind. He wanted to see it. He wanted to understand the great work. Why did they do it? Why did they spend so much time and so much energy to make these stone giants? The stories said the Moai held the power of the ancestors, the first people who came to the island. They said the Moai protected the villages. Manu believed the stories, but a part of him still wanted to see. A few days later, Manu made a decision. He would go to the mountain alone. He woke up very early, before the sun. The sky was still dark gray. He moved quietly out of his small house. His father and mother were sleeping. He walked through the sleeping village. The only things watching him were the giant stone heads. In the dark, they looked even bigger, even more mysterious. Manu felt a little afraid, but he kept walking. He knew the way. He had seen the men walk this path every morning. The walk was long. The sun started to rise, painting the sky with orange and pink. The island was quiet. Manu heard only the sound of his own feet and the sound of the wind. He walked past other villages. He saw other groups of Moai standing on their platforms, watching the land. Each one was a little different, but they all had the same serious faces. Finally, he saw it. The mountain of the stone carvers. It was not like the other mountains on the island. One side of it was cut and shaped. It looked like a giant had taken bites out of the rock, and everywhere there were Moai. Some Moai were finished and standing, waiting to be moved. Some were still lying down, attached to the mountain rock. They looked like they were sleeping in the mountain. And some were broken, big stone heads that had cracked and were left behind. Manu hid behind a large rock and watched. He saw his father and the other men. They were small next to the giant stones. They had stone tools. They hit the mountain rock with their tools. Chip, chip, chip. The sound was constant. It was the heartbeat of the mountain. They were working on a new Moai. It was huge, bigger than any Manu had seen in his village. The men worked together. They did not talk much. They just worked. Their bodies moved in a rhythm. Chip, 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 for hours. Manu watched, his eyes wide. He saw how hard the work was. The sun was hot now. The men were sweating. Dust from the rock was everywhere. But they did not stop. They were making something important. They were giving a face to the stone. He saw how they carved the eyes last. An old man, the master carver, did this special job. When the eyes were carved, it was like the Moai was waking up. It was not just a piece of rock anymore. It had a spirit. Manu stayed there all day. He forgot to eat. He forgot he was thirsty. He was learning. He was seeing the secret of the Moai. It was not magic. It was work. Hard, slow, patient work. When the sun began to go down, the men stopped. They put down their tools. They were very tired. They started to walk back to the village. Manu waited until they were far away. Then he came out from behind the rock. He walked to the place where the men were working. He touched the new Moai. The stone was still a little warm from the sun. He looked at its giant face. He felt very small. He now understood the work, but he did not understand the why any better. Why was this work more important than planting more trees? Why was it more important than building better boats to catch more fish? As he walked home, a new question grew in his mind. It was a bigger question than how. It was the question of why. Over the next few years, Manu grew. He became a strong young man. He worked with his father now. He went to the mountain every day. He learned how to use the stone tools. His hands became hard like his father's hands. He helped carve the giant stone heads. He was proud of his work. But the question in his mind did not go away. It grew bigger, just like he did. He saw that the island was changing. When he was a little boy, the island had many tall, thick trees. Now there were not so many. The men cut down the trees. They needed the trees for many things. They needed the wood for fire. They needed the wood to make houses. But most of all, they needed the wood to move the Moai. Moving a Moai was even harder than carving it. A finished Moai was very, very heavy. It could not walk. The people had to move it. They moved it from the mountain to the villages, sometimes for many kilometers. How did they do it? They used trees. They cut down big trees and made them into long, smooth logs. They put the logs under the Moai. The Moai was like a heavy person on many small wheels. Then, many men would pull the Moai with thick ropes. The ropes were also made from plants on the island. It was slow work. The men pulled and pulled. The Moai moved a tiny bit. Then they moved the logs from the back to the front, and the men pulled again. It took many men and many days to move one Moai to its platform by the sea. For every Moai they moved, they needed many trees, and the chiefs of the villages always wanted more Moai, and they wanted bigger Moai. A big Moai showed that a village was strong and important, so the men carved bigger statues, and to move them, they needed more trees. Manu saw the number of trees on the island getting smaller and smaller. The forest was shrinking. Where there were once many trees, now there were only fields of grass. This was a problem. Without the trees, the soil was not as good. When it rained hard, the good soil would wash into the sea. It was harder to grow sweet potatoes. The crops were smaller. Without the big trees, they could not build strong, big canoes for fishing. The people used to fish far out in the deep ocean, where the big fish lived. Now their canoes were smaller and weaker. They could only fish close to the island. There were fewer fish to eat. Life was becoming harder. The people were often hungry, but still the work continued. The chiefs demanded new Moai, so the men went to the mountain. Chip, 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 and they cut down the last of the big trees to move them. Manu felt a deep worry in his heart. He talked to his father, Rico. "Father," he said one evening, "I am worried. We have fewer trees every year. Our food is less. Why do we keep building the Moai when our people are hungry?" Rico was tired from his work. He looked at Manu with sad eyes. "This is the way," he said. "It is the way of our ancestors. The Moai protect us. They bring us good fortune. If we stop, maybe things will get even worse. The gods will be angry." "But are they protecting us?" Manu asked. "Look around. The land is tired. The sea is not giving us as much. Are the ancestors happy with this?" Rico had no answer. He just shook his head and looked at the floor. He believed in the old ways. He did not know another way. Manu was not satisfied. He needed to talk to someone who knew more. There was one person on the island who was older and wiser than anyone else. His name was Heki. He was an elder. He did not work on the mountain anymore. He lived in a small hut near the coast and told stories of the past. People said he remembered everything. The next day, Manu did not go to the mountain. He went to find Heki. He found the old man sitting outside his hut, looking at the ocean. Heki's face was like an old map of the island, with many lines. His eyes were clear and deep. "Hello, old one," Manu said with respect. Heki looked at Manu. "I see a question in your eyes, son of Rico," the old man said. His voice was quiet, like the sound of small waves on the sand. "It is a big question." Manu was surprised. "How did you know?" "I was young once too," Heki said with a small smile. "I also had questions. Sit. Talk to me." Manu sat on the ground next to Heki. He told the old man about his worries. He talked about the trees, the soil, the fish, and the hunger. He asked the big question again. Why? Why do we continue this work that is hurting our island, our home? Heki listened patiently. He did not interrupt. When Manu finished, the old man was silent for a long time. He looked at the Moai that stood not far from his hut. Its stone face had seen many seasons. Finally, Heki spoke. "You see the Moai," he said. "You see stone. I see a story. Let me tell you that story. Long, long ago," Heki began, Our first ancestors came to this island. They came in big canoes across the great ocean. They were brave. When they arrived, this island was a paradise. It was covered in a great forest of tall, strong trees. The birds were many, and the sea was full of fish. Life was good. Our ancestors were thankful. They wanted to honor their leaders and the gods who helped them find this home, so they began to carve. They carved the Moai as a way to say thank you. The Moai were a connection to the world of the spirits. They were filled with mana, a special power. This power protected the village and made the crops grow. For a long time, this was a good thing. The island gave us everything we needed. It gave us stone for the Moai and wood to move them. And in return, we honored the island and the ancestors. There was a balance. Heke paused and picked up a small, smooth stone from the ground. He held it in his hand. But then, he continued, things began to change. The chiefs of the different villages began to compete. One chief built a big Moai. The chief of the next village wanted a bigger one. It became a show of power. My Moai is bigger than your Moai. My village is more important than your village. They forgot the real reason. They forgot about balance. They only thought about power and pride. They started to take more than the island could give. They cut the trees faster than the trees could grow. They did not see that they were destroying the very home that the ancestors had given them. The Moai, which were meant to be protectors, became part of the island's destruction. Manu listened to every word. This story made sense. It explained the feeling he had in his heart. So what do we do? Manu asked. My father says we cannot stop, that it is the way of our ancestors. Heki looked at Manu with his wise eyes. Our ancestors were smart people. They found this island in a giant ocean. They built a life here from nothing. But they were people, and people can make mistakes. The biggest mistake is to continue on a path that leads to ruin, just because it is the old path. The true way of the ancestors is not just to carve stone, Hiki said. The true way is to be smart, to adapt, to survive, to take care of the family and the land. That is the real mana. The power is not just in the stone, it is in us, in our hands, in our minds. Manu felt something shift inside him. The old man's words were like a light in a dark room. He understood now. The problem was not the Moai themselves. The problem was that the people had lost their way. They were following a tradition without thinking about its effect. Thank you, old one, Manu said. Thank you for this story. A story is just words, Heke said, placing the smooth stone in Manu's hand. Action is what gives it meaning. You have a good heart, Manu, and a questioning mind. Our people need that now. Manu walked back to his village. His mind was full of Hek's words. He knew what he had to do, but he was afraid. Who would listen to a young man against the powerful chiefs and the old traditions? That evening, a terrible storm hit the island. The wind howled like a monster. The rain was heavy and cold. The people stayed in their homes, afraid. The storm lasted for 2 days. When it was over, the sun came out. The people came out of their houses to see the damage. The storm had been very bad. Many of the smaller food plants were destroyed. The weak canoes were broken on the shore. But there was something else. A new giant Moai had been ready to be moved to Manu's village. It was the biggest one they had ever made. The storm had hit it. The ground around it was soft and wet. The giant statue had fallen over. It now lay on its side in the mud like a dead giant. The chief of the village came to look. He was very angry. "We must lift it!" he shouted. "Get the logs! Get the ropes! We will put our protector back in its place." The men, including Manu and his father Rico, gathered. They looked at the giant Moai. It was half buried in the wet earth. They knew it would be almost impossible to lift. "We need more logs," the chief said. "Big, strong logs. Go to the forest and cut them." One of the older men spoke. "Chief," he said nervously, "there are no more big trees. We used the last of them to try to move this Moai before the storm." The chief's face was dark. "Then use small trees. Use whatever you can find." The men tried. They brought smaller logs. They tried to put them under the giant stone head, but the logs were too small. They cracked and broke under the great weight. The Moai did not move. They tried for the whole day. They pushed and pulled. They sweated and shouted. Nothing worked. The Moai was too big, too heavy, and they did not have the strong trees they needed anymore. At the end of the day, the men were exhausted and defeated. They stood looking at the fallen stone giant. The chief was silent, his face a mask of anger and shame. In that moment of silence, Manu saw his chance. He felt afraid, but he thought of Heike's words. Action gives meaning to a story. He stepped forward. "Chief," he said. His voice was steady. "Maybe this is a sign." All eyes turned to him. The chief looked at him surprised. "A sign? What are you talking about, boy?" "The Moai has fallen," Manu said, speaking to all the people who had gathered, "and we cannot lift it. We cannot lift it because we have no more great trees. And we have no more great trees because we used them all for the Moai. The island can no longer give us what we need for this work." He pointed to the damaged food gardens and the broken canoes. "The storm has hurt us. We are hungry. We cannot fish in the deep water. The Moai did not protect us from the storm. The Moai did not save our food. The stone cannot feed our children." Some of the people murmured. They were listening. His words were true. They all felt the hunger. They all saw the empty place where the forest used to be. "What are you saying?" the chief demanded. "That we should abandon our traditions? That we should anger the ancestors?" "No," Manu said. "I am saying we should remember the true tradition. The tradition of survival. The tradition of taking care of our home. Heike, the elder, told me the story. The Moai were meant to show our thanks for the island's gifts. But now we are only taking. We are not giving back. The best way to honor our ancestors is to make sure their children and their children's children can live on this island." Manu looked at his father. Rico was looking at him with a new expression in his eyes. It was not anger. It was understanding. And maybe a little bit of pride. Manu turned back to the crowd. "We have hands that can carve stone," he said, holding up his own hard hands. "These same hands can plant new trees. We can build terraces to protect our soil. We can find new ways to build better canoes from smaller pieces of wood. We can work together, not to build bigger statues, but to build a better life. The island is speaking to us. We need to listen." There was a long silence. The people looked at the fallen Moai. They looked at their empty island. They looked at their hungry families. Manu's words were simple, but they were powerful. They were the truth that everyone felt but was afraid to say. Then an old woman spoke. "The boy is right," she said. "My grandchildren are thin. The stories of the ancestors do not fill their stomachs." Another man nodded. "My fishing net is old, and I cannot build a new canoe to replace it." Slowly, more people started to agree. The feeling in the village was changing. They were tired of the hard work that gave them no food. They were tired of being hungry. The chief saw that he was losing the support of his people. He looked at the fallen Moai, a symbol of his power, now useless in the mud. He knew that things had to change. From that day on, the great work of carving and moving the Moai stopped. It did not stop all at once. It was a slow change, but the village of Manu was the first. They left the fallen Moai where it lay. Instead of going to the mountain, the men started a new work. They worked together to build long walls of stone to protect the gardens from the wind. They learned how to make compost to make the soil rich again. They planted seeds for new trees, the small, fast-growing kinds that were left. Manu became a leader, not because of his strength, but because of his ideas. He worked with the other young men to invent a new kind of canoe, made from many small pieces of wood tied together. It was not as good as the old canoes, but it was strong enough to go out a little farther into the ocean. Life was still hard. The island did not become a paradise overnight. It would take a long, long time for the big trees to grow back. They would never see the great forest of their ancestors. But things started to get better. There was more food. The people worked together in a new way, for a new reason, to help each other. The giant stone heads, the Moai, were not forgotten. They still stood all over the island watching the villages, but they were different now. They were not symbols of power and competition anymore. They were reminders. They were a story written in stone, a story of a great people who did amazing things, but also a story of a mistake, a story about the importance of balance and about listening to the land. Manu grew old. He became an elder himself, like Heke. His face had many lines, and his eyes were wise. He would sit with the children of the island and tell them the story of the Moai. He would point to the silent stone giants. "Look," he would say, "they are our great ancestors. They teach us a very important lesson. They teach us that a people must not only be strong, they must also be wise. They must know when to stop. They must know when it is time to change. They must always remember that we belong to the land. The land does not belong to us." And the stoneheads stood silent, their long faces watching over a new generation. They were a mystery, a warning, and a promise, all carved in the heart of the stone, on a small island in the middle of the big blue ocean. If you enjoyed our story and want to learn more English with us, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It helps us a lot. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.